All right, good afternoon. Natalie, any more progress on the number of people signed up for the
I
Zoom?
think the number went down in the bio lounge because I erased the people who weren't in like the biology department.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's probably maybe 7 or 6 names on that.
Okay, in addition to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, let's do
Is
it.
it like a
Yeah.
definite day that we have to like tell you when we can go or not?
Oh, to the zoo?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going this weekend.
Yeah, because
Oh.
I may be going away.
You may be going away.
home.
Well, we need to figure out who's going to be driving. So, let's see. How many of you guys had vehicles again? Let's see. 1, 2, 3. So 3 vehicles. How many people does it hold? 5.
5.
5.
4.
4.
I mean, 4 come.
4 comfortably. Okay, I can drive too, and mine will fit 4 comfortably. Maybe 1 smaller person. So it looks like we'll need at least 4 cars, possibly 5. And again, I can cover some of the gas costs with my Department P card. So we'll figure out how to do that. But definitely, if you could bring in like a definitive list on Wednesday, then we can plan this out a little bit more. All right. So let's look at the lecture schedule here real quickly. All right. So did you guys watch the TED Talk? Pretty good TED Talk, huh? About how if we want to save the world, we have to save the frogs, basically, because they're very sensitive to pollution. So I don't know. I liked that guy. I thought that he was pretty cool, and it's recent. So basically, we are going to finish our discussion of the invasion of land today, and we're going to begin the classification and natural history of the amphibians. And depending on how far we get with that, I may or may not assign you a learn list. The learn list assignment didn't take that much time, did it? Finding like 3 species. Okay, so that will probably appear later tonight for you guys then. So you can work on that. But again, it does depend. Also, I was thinking about what information to put on the exam. So I think adding another phylogeny to this might be a little much. And what I've done before, and I don't usually like to start new material before an exam, but I think in this case we will stop with the invasion of land as far as your responsibility for the lecture exam material. Does that sound fair? The amphibian phylogeny is actually a lot easier, but again, just in the interest of giving you time to review, and I need to put together some review questions. So our midterm is set up for a week from today, so it will be next Monday, and we will have, if you're available, Sunday evening. You'll see a lot of me this weekend, right? I'm happy to have a study session at 8 o'clock the night before, okay? Just like I do with my other classes. Any questions about that stuff? Yes?
So will the amphibian land list be on it then?
No. No, we're going to push the amphibians to the next exam. Yes?
Are you doing amphibians only on Pennsylvania for the learn list, or just?
Yes. Yeah, I'll give you the learn list just like we did before, and you'll get to pick from that. These are all good questions. Any more? Okay. Now help me remember where I left off here in the invasion of land. So I know we talked about some of the problems and solutions relating to our invasion of land by early tetrapods.
I think we're on difference 3, like problem 3, solution 3.
Okay.
Are we
Density of medium. Gill collapse. Oh, no, I think we're here.
Okay,
Yeah, at the heart. Okay, so it looks like we're getting kind of close to where we need to be here. Okay, remember how last time we looked at the movement of blood around the body in double circulation? Fish only have a one loop circulation, whereas amphibians and above are going to have systemic as well, or pulmonary as well as systemic. So systemic is the old pathway because that's where blood basically circulated throughout the body and then came back to the gills. But the gills were integrated into that systemic loop. When lungs evolved, there was a secondary loop that developed, and that was the pulmonary loop, which oxygenated the blood by going into the alveoli in the lungs, right? So if we think about it, the left atrium is the new one because the left atrium is going to be involved with pumping the blood to the lungs, but the right is the primitive one because it does the systemic loop. All right, and remember we watched that cute video about the heart. Now, the third difference between terrestrial and aquatic environments has to do with the density of the medium. So recall that there's more buoyant forces in the water. So when a fish is swimming, it's basically cradled by the water, and this allows a really interesting sensory apparatus to work, and that's the lateral line system. And the lateral line system is a system of pores that act as sensors in the water to allow the fish to know if there's a temperature change, if there's movement, if there's a heat, or chemicals in some case. So air does not work. If you have a lateral line system, it's not going to work in the air because air is just too sparse. It's not dense enough. So instead of having a lateral line system, we now have the development of an ear, specifically the middle ear and the tympanic membrane, which for us is our eardrum. And we have three middle ear ossicles, so Incus, Malleus, and Stapes for us. And we'll see that reptiles only have one, as well as amphibians and birds, but mammals have three. So what this does is it is going to act as a means of transmitting vibrations to the inner ear. So here we have our tympanic membrane, our external acoustic meatus, so that's going outside to our ear. We have vibrations that hit the tympanic membrane of our eardrum, and then that vibration is translocated through something that looks like Dr. Seuss drew it into the inner ear, basically. Doesn't that look like a Dr. Seuss thing? I think it does. All right, another difference is the constancy of temperature. And this isn't just seasonal, this is temperature day to day. So temperature warming up in the morning and cooling down at night. So in the water keeps things very stable because water has a high vaporation point and high heat capacity specifically. So this keeps aquatic organisms stable. So they have a relatively constant body temperature and a constant metabolic rate. And the problem when an organism moves from an aquatic to a terrestrial habitat is that you have massive changes in the body temperature that could potentially occur. So if we look at, in general, how animals work, what their response to temperatures are, greater than 45 degrees Celsius, you get death because the majority of proteins are going to denature in animals unless they have some really bizarre adaptations that allow them to keep those proteins intact. But this is in general, more than 45 degrees Celsius, death. Less than 0 degrees Celsius, death as well. So cells are going to freeze and burst, and this is going to affect how biochemical reactions occur, specifically how fast. So terrestrial organisms had to evolve some solutions to this, and one of them is body temperature regulation. And organisms have two different ways to do this. First is behavioral. So reptiles move around quite a bit because they're able to control their body temperature. We tend to think of them as being cold-blooded, but if you go out on any warm summer day and you pick up a snake or a lizard, you're going to notice that that snake or that lizard is nice and warm because that lizard and snake are keeping their body at a constant temperature by moving into the sun when they cool down and moving back into the shade when they warm up. So we call this poikilothermy. So these guys, for example, are going to do this, these little reptile guys. And then there's physiological body temperature regulation. So birds and mammals, homeothermy, having a constant body temperature, right? So insulation through fat and feathers. Controllers, we have a thermostat in our brain that's going to help us control our body temperature. And if that doesn't work, then if we get too hot, we can evaporate our water off of our skin through a process known as sweating. And if organisms do not have sweat glands on their bodies, they will often pant. So dogs, for example, when they get hot, they're not capable of sweating, so they pant. And other organisms will gape because they can't sweat, so they'll hold their mouth open. So birds and mammals are expensive. If you compare them to their reptile kin, essentially, what you'll see is that they have a much higher metabolic rate. So anyone in here have a reptile for a pet? I sometimes ask this question. I have a 23-year-old blue-tongued skink. So he's very old. He's like a total, I don't know, like a nursing home case. So I've been trying really hard to keep him comfortable, but I only feed him maybe twice a month right now because he just is not interested in food. But back when he was interested in food, I would feed him once a week, maybe twice a week. That's it. How many times do we eat a day? Well, you're a college student, so it's going to vary, right? Some days you might eat twice, some days you might eat 15 times. But we need a lot more calories to keep us running. All right, so just a few examples of organisms that are homeotherms. And when looking for constancy of temperature, where do we get our heat from? So primarily our heat is going to come from the sun. So it's the primary source for plants and animals. So animals with a low metabolic rate, they're going to get their heat from the sun. And then there's metabolism. So in homeothermic organisms, you have waste heat. I mean, if you feel the heat coming off your body, we release a lot of heat all the time, right? And it's about 65% of our food conversion processes that goes into just producing heat. And then we can also use ATP conversion to ADP in order to provide energy for our metabolism as well. So this is going to affect everything. So the temperature of all plants and animals are affected by these factors. And so we can look at a couple different types of metabolic function related to where the heat comes from. And one of them is the endotherm. So we are endotherms. Our primary source of heat is metabolic. So we do this physiologically. We have heat regulators in our brains that help us know if we're too hot or too cold. What do we do if we're too cold? We shiver, right? And if we're too hot, we sweat. So mammals and birds do this. Ectotherms, these are organisms that get their heat from the sun. And poikilothermy is related to ectothermy in that poikilothermy specifically talks about the behavior that's involved in maintaining body temperature, whereas ectothermy, this is just the metabolic term for this, right? So it's looking at sun as being the heat source. So reptiles, fish, and amphibians modify their behaviors in order to maximize their sun exposure. All right. So now, unless you guys have any specific questions about that material, let's move on to the classification and natural history of the amphibians. And again, this material is not going to be on your first exam because I feel like you have enough to study. But given the course schedule, I think it's good to at least start talking about some of this week and work on our amphibians. So this last lecture, we looked at problems faced by moving to land. So why move to land? For new habitat and resources, safe shelter, and protection of eggs and young. But if we look at features that developed during the Devonian, was our colonization of land really like, coming in, dominating, invading. Well, what were we really doing in the Devonian, the tetrapods? Yes, we were escaping, right? Because the water was not that great. It was stagnant, hot, not holding a lot of oxygen. So these features developed in the Devonian, our lungs and our limbs, and this allowed something like this, right here, this Eusthenopteron and this Acanthostega to become evolved enough to leave an aquatic environment. We looked at Tiktaalik as an example. So what is an amphibian? Well, we can discuss them as being ectothermic, so they get their energy from the sun, basically their heat. They are very primitively quadrupedal, so they're a very primitive tetrapod. They have glandular skin, and they depend on water for reproduction. And they're actually pretty cool. So I have a few videos I'm going to show today. I have to switch back and forth because of this laptop, and normally I bring my black laptop in, but you guys want to know what happened to it? This is going to be filed on one of my really bizarre stories, like really bizarre. Okay, I'm tired, very tired this semester, and I sleepwalk when I'm tired. So I couldn't find my black laptop this morning, and I was kind of flipping out, and I went to go eat breakfast, and I put it in the fridge. So turns out laptops don't like to be put in the fridge, so it's a little bit moist. I may have to bring it to IT. So I don't even know why. It must have been a part of some sort of dream adventure. Anyway, so I may have some glitches here. Okay, so the reason I showed you that video of a growling frog is just to remind you that these guys have a very primitive ancestry. And there were actually members of this amphibian group that were kind of badass and that could kill things, right? So he still has some of those relic adaptations in him. So let's talk a little bit about where they come from. These also arose in the late Devonian. So as organisms were starting to develop lungs and legs, they began to invade the land. So they came from Rhipidestian fishes. Remember that the Rhipidestians, the lobe-finned fish, had a subclass or a subgroup, which was a clade. It's not a subclass. It doesn't have a taxonomic level, and that's clade Tetrapodomorpha. So if you think about it, you and I were all Rhipidestian fish, monophyletically speaking. So what do they have? Limbs that are jointed, strong spines and muscles, because now we have these gravitational forces pushing us down. And that has led to elevating the head with muscles, getting a strong pectoral and pelvic girdle to support the limbs underneath the animal's body. A rib cage is going to protect the sensitive organs inside of that animal. Advanced ears, because they can no longer rely on their lateral line system. And then a strange shortening of the skull. So their skull is getting a lot shorter, but they have a much larger snout. So after the Devonian, the Carboniferous period was actually warm and wet, and you had a swampy landscape with mosses and ferns, which are quite nice. And it was right around this time that they started to radiate, and there were two groups. The Labyrinthodonts, which eventually evolved into some of the reptiles, and then the Lissamphibia. These are the modern amphibians that you and I know today. This is the classification. It is by no means as complicated as the classification of the fish. So this one is pretty much the accepted one. You may see some variations here. So we're going to go through this. All right, so let's look at the Labyrinthodonts. So these guys went from the Devonian to the early Jurassic. So they came from the Rhipidestians, and they have this really interesting tooth structure. So they had a highly folded tooth. So this Labyrinthodont literally means a labyrinth tooth. And this tooth structure actually was also found in the Caphtorhinomorphs. They had two major evolutionary events in their vertebrae. They had something known as zygapophyses, Zygapophyses are some of these projections that are going to allow muscles that are more complex to attach. And then the base of the vertebrae now became enlarged. We call that the centrum, and it became one element. So this is making the organism much more strong. And some of them had a lot of digits. So one of them, known as Ichthyostega, had 7 fingers, essentially, fingers and toes. Another one had 8. But the standard 5 that all the other terrestrial groups have, at least the extant ones have today, even the horses, if you look at them, you can see those rudimentary bones where those digits used to be. And just out of curiosity, do you guys know what digit the horses are standing on? Huh?
Are they standing on 2?
Well, they do have 2 that are fused together strongly to form the cannon bone, but there's still 1 primary digit they're standing on. They're standing on their middle fingers. So every horse you see that's pointing at you with its hoof, you can imagine what it's doing. It's not very nice. So I have a short video, of course, of one of the labyrinthodonts. All right, so those are the extinct amphibians. Now we're looking at the extant or living amphibians. And in general, they have smooth skin without scales, mucus glands and skin, and most of them are going to use their skin for respiration. So we can see kind of a close-up of that wet glandular skin there. They have a 3-chambered heart allowing for double circulation. And then they have pedicellate teeth. So pedicellate teeth, you have the teeth up on these pedicels, and they're the only group that has teeth like that. And I remember one of my professors giving a lecture about amphibian teeth, and he spent 50 minutes talking about them. And I finally raised my hand. I was like, are you talking about extinct amphibians? Or are you talking about living amphibians? And he said, they have teeth. So at the time I was working up in the animal room, or the vivarium that we used to call it at Cal State Pomona, and he said, just stick your hand in one of the cages and let them bite you. So most amphibians, the teeth are kind of small, they're not going to hurt you, but there are some that will hurt you. So of course I found a video. Alright, so in addition to having teeth, they have this other interesting adaptation, which is to take up oxygen through their skin. And now we're going to look at some of the orders. And the first one is Urodela, and this is the salamander and the newts. There's about 360 of them, and they're primarily in temperate and tropical regions. You're not going to find these anywhere near the poles. And they live in either regular terrestrial habitats or freshwater. You're not going to find amphibians in a marine environment. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to why you would not find them in a marine environment? Yeah.
The salt dry them out.
Yeah, they would basically make pickles out of them. Right? They don't have the adaptations to deal with marine osmolarity. A little bit about them. They have 4 limbs and a tail. They also have no eardrum, so they can feel vibrations in the air, but you can scream at them and not worry about making them deaf. Okay, just that's not nice either to scream at them, but they have this really interesting scapular ligament that goes to the back of their skull, and that helps them basically hear with their legs. So that's another way that they can sense things, is through their legs. And the largest one is over 1 meter long, but most of them are tiny little guys. All right, so we already looked at feeding and how effective they are at that. And so as larvae, they do consume small insects. As adults, they're carnivores in that they may consume whatever walks by. It doesn't necessarily have to be an insect. And they do return to water to breed, right? Because they have microlecithal eggs. And those eggs are very small and they can dry out. Their courtship is really complex and it kind of differs from species to species, but some of them involves a swimming behavior, some of them involves dancing, and some of them there's breeding displays. They do have special pheromone production glands called hedonic glands on their legs. Anyone know where that word hedonic comes from in Greek? Hedonism? So basically, partying, right? Lots of shameful partying that the Greeks and the Romans did. So, similar things like that. So they have this really interesting way of fertilizing one another. So the female is actually fertilized by sitting on a special structure known as a spermatophore. So the spermatophore has a sperm packet on it. So this is the spermatophore. And basically he drops it to the ground and the female just settles on top of it and gets the sperm that way. As far as their embryonic development, they are oviparous. They do lay eggs. They have to lay them in water or where it's very moist. And some of the more advanced forms, they are viviparous, so they do give birth to live young. But their larvae are really weak. They have weak limbs, they're fish-like tails, no eyelids, they have a special spiracle, they have external gill slits, and they actually metamorphose into the adult stage through gonad formation. A lot of the larvae look very much like a primitive adult, so they will have these gills that often they go away and then their gonads are developed. So the adults have stronger limbs, the tail slenderizes, they do have eyelids, and they lose this primitive spiracle, which is kind of this interesting opening that seals up. The spiracle is used to move water while that larvae is developing. But if you have a totally aquatic adult, like this one there, it may actually have little to no metamorphosis other than growing gonads. And we call this pedomorphosis. Remember we talked about pedomorphosis before when we looked at Ammocetes. Isn't that lovely how that pops up? I turned off my email, but it still pops up. So neoteny is what happens when there's so much pedomorphosis that really everything is retained that the larva would have. And the only difference is that they would actually get sexually functional gonads. That's it. They look just like the baby in every other aspect. But remember our discussion of pedomorphosis before when we looked at Amphioxus and Ammocetes, and we talked about the origin of the ancestral vertebrate, right? And how Garstang's hypothesis was that there was pedomorphosis where the larval form of a sea squirt, basically a tunicate, that larval form basically stopped growing up. So there was some shift in the DNA. So this is something interesting that happens with some salamanders. All right, so let's move on to the anurin. So anura literally means without a tail, and there's about 6,000 species. It's a difficult thing to identify frog species right now because we're identifying them almost as quickly as we're losing them because there's a global decline of amphibians, especially frogs. So these guys are usually aquatic and they do have back legs that help them swim. They have smooth skin and they're streamlined. Now toads are a little bit different. They're more terrestrial and they walk, and they also have drier skin as well. And as far as anatomy, they have longer hind limbs that are specialized for a type of locomotion called saltatorial, which literally is just hopping. And they have a very powerful pelvis here with elongated ilia and a reduced presacral vertebrae and urostyle. And so they have all these different features that are going to support that movement. But let's look at how interesting their behavior can be. So basically, on Wednesday, we're going to finish up this lecture. Oops, I was on the wrong computer. Okay, so we're going to finish up our lecture of the classification and natural history of amphibians, and I am going to post your Learn List assignment so that you're going to pick 3 local amphibians from this list, and you're going to fill out the PowerPoint so that after we finish our lecture on classification and natural history of amphibians, then what we can do is you guys can give your little presentations of your amphibians, and then on Friday we can basically do a review. Right there it says review fish and amphibians of Pennsylvania, but I'm going to leave it open to you guys. We can review lecture concepts, because what's happening on Monday? Midterm exam 1. And remember that it's going to cover material just through the invasion of land. Okay, so invasion of land will be on it, but amphibians will not. So look for those postings, and I'll send out announcements. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.